In the 1960s, the Department of Transportation's overall plan for expressways included a spur running from the outer loop to downtown. For the Swillburg neighborhood, the highway would cut right through it and destroy it. The state bought up about 220 pieces of property and relocated 265 families in Rochester and Brighton in preparation for the expressway.
There were 18 to 20 homes scheduled to be torn down on Sycamore Street. People were in limbo. People were indecisive about painting the house. They wouldn't do it. Why do it if it's going to be torn down? You could see indecision as far as the overall maintenance of the neighborhood. Some people panicked. They were very nervous about the road coming through, what it would do to their property value.
Ann Nelson Owen became interested in transportation planning in the Rochester area and, in 1969, with other concerned citizens, formed the Citizens for Ecological Transportation Planning, more often referred to as EcoTrans.
We took detailed look at these plans, which had been developed many years earlier, and we were really startled by the width of the highway, by the fact that it was cutting right through a neighborhood, dividing that neighborhood, and an important neighborhood where people had lived for a long time in affordable housing.
The EcoTrans group asked themselves how they could make change when the expressway was well underway and a lot of the land had already been purchased. They concluded that they should research alternatives and write a white paper, which they spent 9 months doing. Then they distributed the white paper to federal, state, and city governments, newspapers, and any interested community members. SEEK, the Housing Council, the Sierra Club, and neighbors from the Swillburg area quickly became allies on this issue.
The Gannett newspapers were extremely important.
Though the Gannett papers were originally in favor of the expressway, after reading the white paper and interviewing the authors, they reversed their positions and wrote editorials against the expressway.
And once that happened, they were there with us. Whenever there were critical key things that were happening, they were there. And that makes a huge difference.
In 1971, a freeze halted further state acquisition of property, and City Council appointed a task force to study alternatives to the urban segment of the expressway, including representatives from EcoTrans, SEEK, the Housing Council, and the Sierra Club, as well as the Swillburg neighborhood.
Well, the task force was very interesting because the task force, as task force should, had a range of interests. When the citizens from these groups looked at the construct of who was on the task force, it was a bit discouraging because it looked like the powers to be against a few of us. But as it turned out, not everybody showed up, and we had more support there than we had expected. We kept researching, we kept responding, we kept sending information out to our community supporters. If there was something that had to be addressed before City Council, people would turn out.
I remember doing three things that I loved. I mean, this was a very thrilling time for me. One was just going around and talking to the groups, to the neighborhood groups, and I enjoyed that. I probably spent 3 or 4 nights a week going out and talking to them. The other was talking to my colleagues, the people in the coalition that fought the expressway, and these included environmental groups like the Sierra Club and EcoTrans. It included professional planners who saw this as a very important issue for preserving city life, and also talking to the public groups. I probably spoke to City Council a dozen times, or spoke at public hearings in which they asked for neighborhood input on the expressway.
In 1973, the task force recommended not building the expressway, and a month later, City Council voted to stop the expressway. But then, in 1975, a group of very influential regional leaders and business people made a last-ditch effort to resurrect the Expressway.
I was impressed as a newly elected councilman with the people who came out from the parishes and the churches, people who were neighborhood businessmen, people who were just common workers, hardworking, blue-collar folks, people who had education behind them, who rallied against us in such a way that it became so obvious that the decision to go with an expressway was really inappropriate.
It appeared to be of extreme importance to them. There was probably more business reaction and involvement in the discourse about this as any issue I can remember, quite frankly. We didn't hear from the industrial segment of the business community, really, the Kodaks or Xeroxes or Gleasons or that like. But downtown retail, banking, the Chamber of Commerce were very outspoken and absolutely passionately believed that the survival of downtown depended on the construction of the expressway.
One of the most interesting aspects of being involved in this vote was the vested interests on both sides. Business, transportation, contractors, people who stood to benefit by creating this also had a voice in what to say and how it should take place. I was surprised when all the council members were invited to a breakfast meeting at one of the hotels downtown prior to the final vote. I don't remember the exact date, but in that room there were representatives from all aspects of those vested interests who wanted to see that expressway built. The doors were closed, the press was locked out. We had a nice breakfast. Each council member was surrounded by different members from the various interest groups. Very cordial, very friendly, very professional. However, at one point, the leader of the group stood up and said, "Now we'd like to know how you vote. We'd like to hear how you're going to vote and why you're going to vote that way."
Well, I think the breakfast meeting really illustrated the conflict over the question of who rules in Rochester. Here you had all the traditional corporate, financial, legal interests that had governed this community for 50, 75, 100 years. And challenging a city council that had its political roots in neighborhoods and neighborhood movements and neighborhood activists and who were opposed to the expressway. And so it became a question of who rules, traditional Rochester, or was this a new chapter in the political leadership of this community? And I think that was symbolized best by a banker who stood up at this breakfast and pointed a finger at Tom Ryan and said, "Who are you to impose your judgment on us," looking at all the corporate splendor of his colleagues, as to what the economic welfare of this community required. And Tom Ryan's was very simple. When they pulled the lever down, my name was there and yours wasn't.
On September 10th, more than 350 people jammed city council chambers to argue for and against the expressway. On the night of the final vote, 1,000 emotional residents packed the East High School auditorium.
A number of people turned out in full force, both sides, Chamber of Commerce, business people, community people. It turned out that the citizens spoke really eloquently.
Finally, around 3 a.m., City Council voted 6-3 to stop the expressway at the city limits.
When we started with this, we knew when there was a requirement the City Council approve it, that we could stop it. But we also wanted to make sure that it didn't get undone. So we started to think about other ways to make sure that this would be a secure agreement. And the idea of that being created as a park was a good way to do that. I had this experience in Albany that the only way you can get rid of a park is to pass the resolution through the state legislature. Both houses have to approve. And they normally require at least twice as much space being put into parks as are taken out by that vote, so they are very strict. And then we wanted to be sure there was no exit from the expressway there at Clinton Avenue that would allow a lot of traffic to then head down Clinton Avenue. And that was something that we thought would be almost as bad as having the expressway.
Otto Henderberg Park was dedicated soon after the Expressway vote. And with Tom Fry on the State Assembly Transportation Committee, the outer loop was completed as a T with no exits for Clinton Avenue. After the hard-fought battle over the Expressway, a remarkable spirit of reconciliation prevailed, and everyone resolved to restore both downtown and city neighborhoods. In Swillburg, the long battle to replace torn-down houses and repair neglected homes began. From the Expressway issue to the present time, the Swillburg Neighborhood Association has existed without interruption, led by a succession of concerned and dedicated neighbors. These volunteers have created and maintained beautiful flower gardens. They've gotten grants for local artist Maria Frisk to create 5 art panels depicting Swillburg history, and for a gazebo in Otto Henderberg Park. Today, Swillburg's diversity, affordable small homes, and down-to-earth village atmosphere continue to draw new residents. Its main shopping area, South Clinton Avenue, is home to the landmark Cinema Theater. Its restaurants serve both down-home American food and a variety of international cuisines. We are able to live in this unique and vibrant community that is Swillburg, thanks to the neighbors and legislators who, 40 years ago, had the foresight and vision to prevent an expressway from dividing and ruining our neighborhood. And thanks to all the people who had the initiative and determination to rebuild the neighborhood after the defeat of the expressway.